Welcome everybody to the April 3rd State Forest Advisory Committee meeting. We have a first of our kind of hybrid meetings for this committee, where we have a number of the committee members here in the Tillamook room back on the Salem campus for the first time in a long time, which is a good feeling. And as we transition, we still have some folks on the committee and otherwise attending virtually, it's great to have that option. For those who are here in the room, those state offices are expected to open on May 1st or so. We're still in that transition phase. So as we're all used to, respect everybody's space and interests in proximity while we're still in this transition phase to full public opening. We have a pretty full agenda in our 9 to 12 o'clock time schedule, so we'll try to stay on time where we can. We'll note that through in the agenda we have a designated public comment period where we'll provide a chance for public to provide input. If you have something you'd like to share with the committee, we'd really like to hear from you, and that'll occur at 9:15. So keep your eye on that. Let's start, I guess, around the room with introductions. Maybe Jason, you want to start at the end?
Sure. Jason Cox, ODF Public Affairs.
Derek Bangs, Oregon Department of Forestry Planning Coordination Unit.
Bodie Dowding, Oregon Department of Forestry Forest Management Plan Project Lead.
Good morning. My name is Kyle Kopp. I'm the San Am Unit Forester out of the North Cascade District for ODF.
Andy White, Northwest Oregon Area Director and one of the co-conveners of the State Forest Advisory Committee.
Bob.
Good morning, Ron Zilli. I serve as the Deputy Division Chief for Planning for State Forest and the other co-convener of the committee.
Barrett Brown, a motorized recreation representative and chair of the State Forest Advisory Committee.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Robbie LaFave, and I'm the assistant to the area director for Northwest Oregon area.
Good morning, Mike Chody. I'm with the Oregon Hunters Association and a recreation rep here on the committee.
Good morning, Margaret Magruder, Columbia County Commissioner, and I represent the Council of Forest Trust Lands. And if you're not here, you are missing some dynamite blueberry muffins.
Good morning, everybody. Amanda Sullivan-Astor. I'm the Forest Policy Manager for Associated Oregon Loggers and the Forest Operations Representative for the SFAC.
Great. So as for, I guess we formally, as far as SFAC membership, do we have members of the committee attending virtually?
Leslie Shaw, unaffiliated.
Okay.
Lisa Phipps, environmental.
Hi, Lisa.
Hi.
Greg Jacob, environmental.
Susan Knudsen-Obermeyer, member at large, and I'm in California right now watching my grandkids.
Good morning, Susan.
Environmental and vice chair of the SFAC.
Denise.
Mike Kennedy, the Select Tribe.
Morning, Mike.
Lisa, hi, non-motorized.
Great, Lisa. Do we know if Tom or Mike has?
I'm here. This is Mike McKibben with Stimson Lumber Company. I'm representing the timber industry.
Great. Hi, Mike. We just have Mike Kennedy. Am I right? Potentially, or
Mike Kennedy's there. Tom Scoggins.
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, okay. I got the wrong Mike. Okay, so it's just Tom then. Sorry. All right, thanks. Great. And on the call and in the room here, we want to just take a minute to have district staff, not at the table, introduce themselves. Now let's start in the room. Kyle.
Kyle Smith, I'm the community engagement coordinator for the Michael Curran, I'm the district forester.
And on the call, what do you, your guidance on who might be just the number of, we have, I don't know how many staff people we have on the call, so.
Jason, could you characterize who else is in the room?
Yeah, so we have a number of, we have 38 people on the Zoom, including ODF staff, and there are some members of the public here as well.
Yeah, so your call as far as how deep. Okay, yeah, I think with the list of folks online, we probably won't invest the time in introducing everybody on the call. Sorry to say, when we're in the room in person, it'll be great to do so. Okay, I'll turn it over to you, Andy, to talk a little bit about committee membership and where we're at.
Okay, thanks, Barrett. So as we got to the end of last year, we had 4 members with expiring terms. That was Mike Kennedy, Lisa High, Mike McKibben, and Ken McCall. And 3 of those individuals rolled forward into another term, and that was Mike Kennedy, Lisa High, and Mike McKibben. And so most of those folks are joining us today as well. Ken McCall, however, stepped down, which created a vacancy in the non-affiliated slot, and that slot Leslie Shaw moved over into, and then we filled that recreation slot with Mr. Mike Tody, who's with us here today. And Mike, you're also a policy manager or policy, what's the right term there for OHA?
Conservation director.
Conservation director. Okay.
Hello, Sandy.
Okay. And so wanted to make sure, trying to honor the the seats at the table, and it felt more appropriate to have Mike in an affiliated versus a non-affiliated seat there. And so the last piece there on vacancies is Chris Inquist. Chatted with him. Chris was another one of our non-affiliated members. He's got a new job at DPSST, and one that just did not allow him to participate at the level he'd like to. So we're still working to try and fill one vacancy on the committee, which is a non-affiliated, in trying to replace Chris Inquist. So any questions on any of the membership seats? Okay.
Great. Great. A couple of things I should have added to housekeeping. As I mentioned, we're in this hybrid setting, so it's suboptimal to try and run the meeting in this way and keep track of especially committee members who would like to contribute. So a little grace for everybody, to Jason as well, is going to try and help facilitate good participation across the platforms. Make sure your phones are muted and turned off here, and as well online to make sure you're muting your Zoom application for us. That would be great. Let's go into our public comment period. What do you see, Jason? I'll let you facilitate.
Thank you, Chair. For the record, my name is Jason Cox, ODF Public Affairs, and now is the portion of the meeting set up for public comment. So if you would like to offer comment, please use the raise hand function. You will have about 3 minutes to do that. And so we'll give folks a few seconds to opt into that if they wish to do so. Chair, I'm seeing no one raising their hand for public comment. So I think we can proceed, and maybe if someone is still hunting for that button, I'll let you know here in just a minute.
Okay, thanks. And again, Jason's also going to try and help keep an eye on committee members raising their hands as best we can. So getting right into planning updates. How do you want to start, Andy, with this section? Yeah.
Yeah, I think we should just, so we've got a variety of staff joining us virtually and some here. And our first group is split. We've got both Cindy Kolomichuk and Bodie Dowding for the HCPF MP update. Cindy's going to go first, and she is virtual. So Jason Cox is going to, I believe, pull up the presentation. And then once he's ready, we can shift to Cindy.
Okay, good morning, everyone. My apologies for not being able to attend in person. Looks like you guys have a great group there. And so we'll just get started here. Again, I'm Cindy Kolomichuk, and I'm the Western States HCP project manager. And I'm going to give a really brief update on the timeline and then turn it over to Bodie, and he'll get into a deeper dive on the forest management plan. So next slide, Jason. Okay, so I'm just going to begin by giving you a little orientation to this timeline here. You'll see that we've got an FMP timeline, HCP, and NEPA. Those are indicated by the different colors. And on the timeline, you will see that there are the small circles. Those indicate milestones. If they are yellow, that indicates points of contact with the Board of Forestry. So that's when we're checking in with the Board of Forestry and getting direction. Bodie's going to go through the FMP timeline up there in orange. So I will focus your attention towards the bottom. The green is HCP and NEPA, which is blue. And we'll run right through this and then see if you have any questions. So as many of you are aware, we began the NEPA process in March of 2021. At that time, NOAA kicked off the NEPA process with public scoping. We also released the administrative draft for review, and that was up on our website. Through the public scoping process, NOAA was seeking some feedback on what they should be analyzing in the environmental impact statement. And so based on that feedback, they developed alternatives to the HCP, which is considered the proposed action, to be evaluated in the environmental impact statement. And this is a draft environmental impact statement, which will be updated later on in the process. So we just hit a major milestone where the draft EIS was complete and released to the public on March 18th. At this time, we also released the public draft HCP, and this launched a public comment period for both of those documents that is 60 days long. So it started on March 18th and it ends on May 17th. We have received, the services have received a request to extend that public comment period. And so they are currently considering that right now. And I think they're trying to make a decision on that pretty quickly so that folks will be aware of the amount of time they'll have to digest this very large and technical document. Yesterday, we had a public hearing where ICF, who is the consultant for NOAA Fisheries, presented the draft EIS. And they also had an opportunity for public comment, public testimony that would be part of the federal public comment process. In order for any of the feedback on the HCP or the draft EIS to be heard, it has to be entered through the federal process. And we do have a link to that on our website. I'm happy to answer any questions about that. Okay, and then moving forward, we are having, it's not on here, but on April 29th, we are having a special Forest Trust Land Advisory Committee meeting where we are customizing the draft EIS presentation for the counties because we have some analysis by taxing district. So they'll see what the effects are locally. And then we'll give them an opportunity to ask the questions of the consultant about the analysis and provide feedback. But again, any feedback does have to be entered through the federal process and their links so that it can be considered. Then our big touch point with the Board of Forestry here is May 10th. We're having a special Board of Forestry meeting that is just for the draft EIS. The consultants that prepare the draft EIS and that have been doing the presentations will be there to present the DEIS to the Board of Forestry. The intention of this meeting is to allow some time for the Board of Forestry to interact with the services, so Fish and Wildlife Service and NOAA Fisheries, as well as that contractor, to ask any questions that they have about the draft EIS, the analysis, the assumptions that were made, as well as any questions they might have about the NEPA process moving forward. That meeting will also include a facilitated discussion between the Board of Forestry and the Forest Trust Land Advisory Committee members. So that's going to be a little bit different than the regular testimony that we usually see from FTLAC. The Board of Forestry is currently developing some prompting questions for the FTLAC to respond to, and we will have our facilitators at Kearns and West facilitate that discussion. So it should be interesting, and we're hoping a really productive conversation between the Board of Forestry and FTLAC. So between now and or that time and September 7th, which is our next touch point with the Board of Forestry, ODF will be working with the services to process all of the feedback given on the draft EIS. All of the feedback, all the comments have to be addressed and responded to. So that's going to be a lot of work, and we'll be working with them to go through those comments. Now, as we're going through those comments, well, first, they will be summarized in the final environmental impact statement. So everyone will see what those comments are. And those comments will help to inform the final environmental impact statement. So we're going to be doing all of that work this summer. And then we come back to the board on September 7th. At this time, we'll provide an overview of that public comment, just a summary there. And this is the board's opportunity to give us any direction on the HCP moving into the final environmental impact statement. That is, if they would like us to change anything about the HCP, that's their time to direct us to do so. So at that point, then, we move into the final environmental impact statement, which is going to be a similar analysis as the draft EIS. It will be improved based upon feedback from the public and the other agencies. And then you'll see here that in February, we are anticipating that that is when the services will publish the record of decision on that final environmental impact statement and the incidental take permit applications. So that's a lot of information and a lot of acronyms. So I'm just going to let you have a moment to digest that. And I would like to just kind of bring it out just a little bit on that timeline to just describe an overarching piece that's very important. And that is NOAA Fisheries is required to complete the NEPA process in 2 years. And so that clock begins in March of 2021 when public scoping began, which means that all of this has to be wrapped up by March of 2023. And again, publishing the record of decision is sort of that last step. And so we have that occurring in February of 2023. So we have all of a month of wiggle room, which isn't a lot. So we're going to be working really hard to make this timeline work. And with that, I'm not sure, Ron, if it's okay if we have time to answer any questions or if that would come at the end. I'll take your lead on that. Thank you very much.
Yeah, certainly. Any questions for Cindy on the timeline that she just described?
And committee members online, please feel free to use raise hand if you have a question or want to jump in.
Yeah, go ahead, Amanda. And that reminds me, I did not mention, for the benefit of those online or listening, if you just briefly mention your name before you begin comments so people know who's speaking. Yeah, go ahead, Amanda.
Yeah, thanks, Barrett. Amanda with Associated Organ Loggers. So Cindy, I just wanted to ask related to the extension request. Obviously, May 17th is going to be here before we know it. So, I mean, what would ODF like to be the timeline, or I mean, what can we expect as far as a decision on whether or not that extension is going to be granted? I know you said that that's being worked on and being discussed, but some clarity would be really helpful. And I don't know if there's anybody from NOAA Fisheries on the line that can help with that.
Thank you, Amanda. That's a great question. And there is not anyone from NOAA on the line. We did have a meeting with them yesterday, and they let us know that they're going to try to make a decision by Friday. So ODF doesn't really get a say here. That's a federal decision and a federal action. We also requested, well, at the urging of the stakeholders, we requested an extension, if you recall, on the public scoping process, public comment period, and we were granted that because we did that so that our stakeholders would have a little bit more time to also consume the administrative draft HCP, which was released at that time. So we should know by Friday, and I hope that everyone does have enough time to digest this information. And again, we will have the Board of Forestry meeting where you'll get another chance at seeing a deeper dive into the draft EIS. And that public hearing held yesterday is recorded. So once I get that from NOAA Fisheries, I'll put it up on our website as well. And it looks like Lisa has a question.
Hi, yeah. So Lisa Phipps, there may be no connection. I was just kind of curious, is there any intersection with the Forest Accord that was, just recently gone through and this process? And if there is, how does it align?
Thank you, Lisa. That is also a great question. These are separate processes. And so the process itself really is not affected by the private forest accord. We develop conservation strategies with the services consistent with our mandate to meet greatest permanent value. And so the way that our HCP is going to look, it's going to be different than that of private forest lands because they have different objectives. So at any rate, there obviously, we've got a lot of HCP efforts happening in the state right now. It's confusing. They are all going to look a little different though, because it's different land ownership and they have different mandates.
Thank you for that.
And Greg?
Yeah, Cindy, you mentioned on September 7th, the Board of Forestry will look at the HCP or can change it. When you say, I don't know if you said the word change, do they make recommendation? Do they want to modify it? What role do they specifically have at that on the 7th of September?
They would have the ability to look at the public comment from the draft EIS and direct us to make, at any point, the Board of Forestry could direct us to make changes. But this will be sort of their, an informed place where they have feedback from the public on what the public would like to see. And it would be really the last chance for us to make changes to the HCP before we enter into the final environmental impact statement.
Okay.
So the Board of Forestry may direct us to continue with the proposed action as ODF has prepared in collaboration with the services and the other state agencies for the last 4 years. So ODF, currently believes that we have really optimized the HCP to provide revenue outcomes as well as conservation outcomes. But we're going to look at what the public comment says and see, if there are areas that could be improved upon. And that would be a board decision, and that would happen in September.
Thank you.
Okay, if there are no more questions for Cindy, is Nick, or do you have a piggyback on the FMP side?
Yeah. Thanks, Barrett. So my name is Bodie Dowding. I'm the Forest Management Plan Project Lead, and I'm going to be talking about the FMP, also known as the Forest Management Plan. And so currently we sit at April of 2022. We just brought the draft strategies to the board. And as you can see from the timeline, we've also brought the guiding principles and the draft goals to the board earlier. And we live in this section where we're writing the draft FMP in that section in 2022. And so that is the work that we are currently doing. And I'm going to go deeper into depth of what that involves, but just I want to point that out. That's where we live right now. We're looking to bring modeled outcomes to the board in January of 23, and then we're looking for a Board of Forestry decision to enter rulemaking in May of 23, and then Board of Forestry approval in November of 23 for the FMP. And then you can see the FMP rulemaking there between the decision to enter rulemaking and the Board of Forestry approval. And something of note for SFAC is that we've been discussing using SFAC as a rules advisory committee for the rulemaking process. And the purpose for that would be to develop a fiscal impact statement. And we've decided that it probably wouldn't be the most efficient process to use SFAC to develop that fiscal impact statement. And so we are not going to be using SFAC as a rules advisory committee. And there was a lot of internal discussion about that. And that's where we landed at this point. So moving on to the next slide. These are all the pieces of the forest management plan that we're working on at the moment. And for context, ICF is the contractor that has been helping us with the HCP, and they're also helping us develop the FMP. And so ICF is going to be writing the majority of the introduction using previous FMP introductions, and then other sections of the FMP as a guide with what to include. Guiding principles are in final draft form and have already been provided to the board. And then we have a group of ODF personnel working on the description of the forest resource, and that's in its early stages, and that's going to be written by the ODF personnel and then ICF. The management approach is like the vision for the plan. And so when you see management approach, think vision. It's how the goals and the strategies work together on the landscape and across the forest to achieve greatest permanent value. And so we've really been putting a lot of thought into the management approach and what we want to say there. And we've got a ODF team working on writing that. And so we've been drafting that. And it's really, like I said, an important piece of the FMP, and is going to be like the vision for the plan. And then the goals and strategies. Goals are what the state forester intends to achieve with the plan, and then strategies are techniques to implement those goals. And those I would characterize as rough draft form. We brought those to the board. We've gotten a lot of feedback on those, and we're doing editing. ICF is helping us edit with eye towards reduction in the number of goals and strategies, and trying to simplify them and consolidate them. And so that's what we are working on currently with goals and strategies. Implementation guidelines describe who is responsible for implementing the plan. And they also talk about our implementation plan process and our annual operation plan process. And they lay out those processes. We have not yet begun those. And then asset management unit guidelines provide overall direction on investments, marketing, and expenses, and those are in rough draft form. And then adaptive management and research and monitoring guidelines are just what they sound like, guidelines for adaptive management, research, and monitoring. And we have a group that's working on those. We do not have a rough draft yet, but so you can see there's a lot going on with the writing of the FMP. There's a lot of sections here. And I just wanted to highlight that there's a lot of work going on within ODF writing the FMP to bring it to the board in November. And with that writing, there's quite a bit of review going on. We have the ODF district personnel and specialists reviewing the sections after they've been written by various ODF staff. Some ODF staff that are writing them are at the district level and some are at the Salem level. But once things have been written, they're going out to districts for review, and everything's going to the districts for review. Everything is going to our state partners for review, which is ODFW, DSL, and DEQ. And then ICF is also reviewing sections. And then the ODF Forest Management Plan Leadership Group. And some of these reviews are iterative. So anything we have now, if we have a rough draft, I would definitely characterize it as a rough draft because we're doing a lot of review work, trying to consider comments. And then also we've been considering public comment as well in the review process. The goals and strategies were shared very extensively before they were presented to the Board of Forestry. Lots of public meetings. They were shared with SFAC and FTLAC and with the tribes. And the tribes actually worked very closely with ODF to develop their own specific cultural goals and strategies. And we thank Cindy for working closely with the tribes to develop those. And so what we're working on now is the draft FMP, which is going to include the revised goals and strategies, but the public review process for that is not going to be the same as it was for the goals and the strategies. The real chance for public comment is going to be at the November Board of Forestry presentation when we present the draft FMP, but we're planning on having an informational public meeting in September of 22 so people can get an idea of what is going to be in the FMP before they comment at the board. And I believe I didn't miss anything that I was supposed to talk about. So does anybody have any questions? Did I not mention that?
One question here that the chair's gone, and I don't know if the vice chair's now trying to run it or not. So there's a lot of elements to this. And so some of the key parts you're kind of doing piece by piece in terms of going to the board or getting chances for public input. I'm just kind of wondering if that could be the process for some of the other things. I'm thinking just to be more specific, sorry, this is Mike Tody, folks, for listening. The implementation part, which is kind of where it gets more to this group in the future, is that going to be something that SFAC's going to see before the September public information meeting or November board meeting?
No, we plan on rolling that all out with the public meeting and then the board meeting for comment. If that's something SFAC is wanting to see ahead of time, I think perhaps we could discuss that, but that is not the current plan. And the public engagement with the goals and the strategies and the guiding principles, the goals and the strategies and the guiding principles really drive the direction. And so the thought was, get the public engagement on those and find out what's important to people, and then write the rest of the plan revolving around those and implementing those. And with so many pieces of it, it would add a lot of time to the timeline to get public engagement on those pieces. And then, so that, I guess, to answer your question, no, that is not the current plan.
Well, Mike, I'll add that SFAC before your membership, we were engaged quite a bit in goals, strategy, conversations, and focus groups that Cindy ran also. So that's in the rearview mirror anyway.
Can I get a follow-up here just real quick then? So with that, once again, kind of focusing on the SFAC role of implementation there, is the thought right now that you'll stay with annual operations plans, or are you considering a biannual operation plan, or is there some change there in implementation down the road that you're kicking around?
Yeah, Mike, we're still exploring that right now. As we get this thing rolled up, we're going to look at how the outputs flow and then timing. I think my personal, as the current planning deputy, is to strive to go to a biennial implementation plan if we can do that. We got some details to work out, but it would be much more efficient for staff. So we're not always in a continual annual process, and we can provide a little space there for, do another core business.
I appreciate that, Ron. I'm just kind of trying to think from the perspective as we're engaging with the agency for promoting whatever it is we're doing there. That just puts, it streamlines planning for the agency, but it puts a lot more. I mean, if you don't get something into the plan now, you're looking at 2-3 years down the road before you have the next opportunity. So that's why I'm asking.
No, I appreciate that. And it is certainly a conversation yet to be had. I'm just thinking about past practices and how can we maybe streamline some things, particularly with the benefits of, an HCP. If we got to fully consider the flexibility that provides us, where, the survey timing drives a lot of our annual process right now. So if we're not having to survey everything with an HCP down the road. So I suspect we'd likely start with annual plans as we transition, but then we'll see what we do with planning certainty to get things out there a little better.
And I'd like to add, Mike, so after things are presented to the board, it's not like we're presenting the final FMP to the board. We are presenting the draft FMP to the board, and then there will be the opportunity for input there. And then likely we will have some revision after that as well. So it's not like the opportunity for input is finished.
Go ahead, Amanda.
Hey guys, Amanda with Associated Oregon Loggers. So first off, I'm very uncomfortable that this group that is supposed to be advising specifically on state forest matters is not being utilized to the fullest to actually carry out that role with the FMP, related to whether it be the decision not to use this group to look at the FIS, related to the, RAC process, nothing being released to this group until it's given to the board. I'm very, very uncomfortable with that process and feel like it's a misstep to not utilize this group to the fullest to be able to actually do what we're supposed to do, which is advise on these matters before they're written in a form more formally presented to the board. So I just want to get that on the record. Secondly, I'm wondering what's happened to the performance measures. I don't think that I saw anything related to those being released in the timeline. And, we might sound like a broken record, AOL, wanting to see some measurements associated with the goals and strategies, but just kind of wondering where that's at. That's something that in my mind, this group should be reviewing in addition to what Mike talked about related to the implementation guidelines. It seems like those are all very connected and would be a great, this body would be a great place to really work those and make those something that's reasonable for movement in the future. And so my final point, and then I will be quiet, is, kind of related to Ron, what you were saying with the AOPs and potentially moving towards biennial. Just remember that the market and the customers that you guys work with rely on certainty, and the longer you make that planning document, the more uncertain it is, which is not going to help as we're in a workforce crisis. We are really struggling, and I feel like that's not really going to help those issues. And Yeah, I understand it from the perspective of the agency, but we'd like you to see it from our perspective as well. So just that certainty is extremely important to us, and kind of knowing what you're going to do. Not saying that, you know, a 2-year plan is going to be extremely uncertain, but what we've seen as far as like IP is being even just somewhat longer than an AOP, it just creates a lot of uncertainty, and that's definitely not what we need right now. Thank you.
Thanks, Amanda. I see Mike McKibben with your hand up.
Yeah, I would just follow up with what Amanda said there. This is Mike McKibben with Stimson Lumber Company, and I represent the timber industry on the SFAC advisory group here. And, you know, Bodie, I guess the question I would ask is, if we're not being used to as a sounding board for the fiscal part of what's going on here, then what group is? You know, to me, that's a big part of how this stuff all gets boiled down, and where the rubber meets the road. And we've got everybody in the room that we need here from every different interest group. And so I guess that I'd like my comment also to be on the record, that, you know, why aren't we being more involved in that part of the process?
Anybody else? I think Ron will have Ron kind of speak to that a little bit. Is there anybody else on the committee who would like to comment or kind of reflect on Amanda and Mike's thoughts? Okay, yeah, seeing no hands up, but Ron, we'll turn the floor over to you.
Yeah, I'll loop back on a couple of things. First, to Amanda, I really do appreciate your comments there. And I think that we can give that at least consideration relative to this committee is to advise us on the implementation of our plan. And I think that in the policy development arena, you know, as we are working through particularly like the implementation element of that plan, there certainly would be a connection there on, you know, how are we thinking about implementing it if this body is to advise us on the ultimate implementation of it. So I do think that's something we should go back and think about. The annual planning process or the implementation planning process for actually doing the operation, still a conversation, you know, to be had, just trying to, you know, visualize how can the world, you know, be different than what we've been doing. So there's certainly a conversation there, and appreciate that input. And then, you know, to you and Mike's point, you know, this plan is a little bit different than some administrative rules in that it's very broad in what it's doing. And it's a plan that is adopted as a rule, and it's not just a rule that's very more narrow in scope, that's been directed as a regulatory kind of framework. So the plan in and of itself becoming a rule requires you know, a fiscal impact statement. We use a process in the development of that plan that's very robust and long. So we use the Forest Trust Lands Advisory Committee, multiple presentations to the Board of Forestry and other groups and publics along the way. So that's what we're using to inform the development of the plan. And then from all that information, it's our intention to develop a fiscal impact statement. And that is a process we've used in the past as well with the FMPs for that purpose. Rather than, you know, going back and trying to, for efficiency purposes, take this group and sort of walk back through the whole elements of the plan and analysis to come up with the fiscal impact statement, which is what we're trying to do. So that's our intention at this point, and why. And I would turn it over to Justin, or at least offer if he had anything else to add that we might have missed. He's our policy analyst and keeps us all straight on these matters.
Nothing to add. Thank you.
And I can make an attempt at answering the question on the performance measures. So we've been having a lot of discussions about performance measures, and because the plan becomes a rule, and rules are very difficult to change, I'm not saying the performance measures are not going to be in the plan, because we don't know whether they are or not, but we are leaning towards maybe they're not going to be, because they would be set and then they wouldn't be changeable. And so recognizing that they're very important, and we would really like the board to support the performance measures, we're trying to work with the board to find out what they want to use for performance measures. So performance measures are definitely not lost. But we didn't want to decide on something and find out that it didn't work and then not have a real opportunity to change it because it's, solidified as a rule. And so there's been a lot of discussions about performance measures, and so they've definitely not gone away. They're very, very discussed in the process. That's about the context I can give for that.
Amanda with AOL, just a quick follow-up. So related to the performance measures, I do feel like the benefit that performance measures would have at whatever high level or whatever level you would want to write them in. I think that the benefit they have to ODF is that they provide a license to operate and they provide certainty to the market. So I think that there are some significant benefits. I understand the flip side of that, right? But related to being a partner with folks that you guys rely on to get your work accomplished, I think that there are some significant benefits to including them at a certain level. So I don't think you have to be extremely prescriptive. That's what the IPs and the AOPs are for, obviously. But I do think there is a benefit to having some level of metrics within the context of the FMP.
Looking for other member comments. I'll ask, Bodie, you said that we're working on this question of performance measures. Now, can you characterize who's having that discussion and to what extent, and can you characterize the board engagement in that discussion of whether those would be included or not?
So I am not the one having the discussions with the board. I do know that people above me are having discussions with the board. So I'm sorry, I'm not really privy to those discussions. I do know that we have discussed a lot that they are happening. So I don't know if there's anyone else on the call or in the room that is aware of exactly how that is happening. But all I can say is I've been in a lot of conversations where we've talked about it's being discussed with the board and we really want the board to own performance measures. But I have not been in the discussions. So
you really want the board to what?
To own the performance measures. We want the board to really buy into the performance measures. Like we want them to believe in the performance measures. And so,
yeah, obviously that's whether they're included as a board decision. So, if there's just wanted to see if somebody could characterize the nature of that process, that piece of the process, about whether and how performance measures are included.
Yeah, I do think that Bodie characterized the conversation correctly. I know that Mike Wilson and our division chief are having conversations with board members on the scoping of that and what they're going to be and where they're going to reside and how they're going to be codified. So it's an ongoing conversation.
Okay, thanks. Anything else, Bodie?
No, thank you.
Okay. Sure. Amanda, go ahead.
Okay, sorry guys, this is Amanda from Associated Oregon Loggers again. So one quick go back on Ron, your mention, we've had somewhat of a conversation about the fiscal impact statement, and just kind of going back to what Mike said. I know we're on the FMP, but it is connected to the HCP, and so I did want to just mention that related to Associated Oregon Loggers specifically, and the Oregonians that we represent, we were pretty frustrated by the lack of effects analysis in the NEPA document and the DEIS related to workforce and the differences between alternatives. I know FTLAC has typically been consulted related to, fiscal impacts and community effects and social effects related to operations. But I do feel like there is a lot missing from that analysis, and I would really hate to see that also be missing from the FIS, related to the FMP. So just want to state that and don't want to see a duplication of the same effects analysis that was done in the DEIS.
I'll let folks finish note taking. Okay, we're good to move on then. Jennifer teed up then for our IP revisions.
Okay, can everybody see my presentation there?
Yes, thanks. Perfect.
Right, fantastic. Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Jennifer Erdman. I'm a planning specialist for the State Forest Planning and Coordination Unit. Today, I will be discussing the planning process, timeline, and opportunities for engagement for the revised implementation plans. In October of 2020, the Board of Forestry gave direction to the State Forest Division to continue the development of a draft habitat conservation plan and a new forest management plan for Western Oregon State Forest. While the habitat conservation plan is going through the NEPA process, the division is focusing resources on the development of the new forest management plan and supporting implementation plans. These plans are going through a staggered development process as the details of each planning level feed into the next. The draft habitat conservation plan is expected to be completed by June 2023. The new forest management plan process is expected to be completed in early 2024, and the new implementation plans are expected to be completed in early 2025. So in addition to the policy work that we just mentioned there, the current implementation plans for many of the districts will be expiring in June of 2023. This creates a transition period from July 2023 to June 2025 that will need coverage as the new forest management plan and new implementation plans continue to be developed. In order to cover this transition period, the current implementation plans need to be revised and extended until June 30th of 2025. Should we get direction to implement the new habitat conservation plan and the provisions of the incidental take permit, the transition implementation plans will incorporate these requirements while the FMP is being completed. The revisions to the implementation plans will address the current forest management plan strategies, draft habitat conservation plan requirements, provisions of the incidental take permit, new data on forest resources for each district, updates to the forest land management classification system, potential adjustment to harvest levels based on modeling outcomes, and potential landscape design adjustments as needed to provide for the draft habitat conservation plan requirements and the current forest management plan. This is not a complete redesign, but instead it will be smaller in scale, resource focused, and done in collaboration with ODF and ODF&W biologists. We're currently working on a template that will be used by all districts to standardize the information and flow of the implementation plans. Once the template is complete, the writing and analysis will continue through August. From there, we will have extensive review opportunities by internal staff, partners, and the State Forest Advisory Committee. The public comment period will begin in November. Once the public comment period closes, the comments received are reviewed and staff will consider making any suggested adjustments before the plans are approved by the State Forester in March of 2023. We will provide updates to the State Forest Advisory Committee as the planning process continues. The draft plans will be presented at the October 27th State Forest Advisory Committee meeting. The division will hold a public information workshop in early November, and the 30-day public comment period will follow. So I know that was really quick and short there. Like I said, the process is just beginning with the development of the templates, and we'll be working with staff throughout the year and our partners to get good products for the division. Ron will probably be most likely to answer any questions, as I have only been back in State Forest for 2 months here, having been in the Forest Resources Division. So I'm on a developmental assignment here in the division as the project manager for revised IPs through the calendar year 2022.
Any questions? Any questions from the committee? Yep, Mike, Tony, go ahead.
So just getting caught up here, Ron, and coming up to speed, but so if I'm hearing this right, I mean, current IPs for the districts are either about to expire or expiring here, and we're just looking to something to bridge the gap. But is it safe to say that probably the question is more, why not just extend the current IPs as opposed to trying to do a revision? And is the revision essentially kind of the precursor to the assumed HCP, FMP, and that?
So yeah, we have a need for continuity of core business to revise or extend implementation plans prior to the anticipated timelines for adoption of the Habitat Conservation Plan and new forest management plans. We have to have a bridge. And that's what we've done, is selected the fiscal 24-25 timeline to provide that bridge. It's a balance of investing in what we know about, that the revising them, keeping it short so it's relevant and we don't have to project out too far as these policies continue to be developed. But they do provide a merging, I would say, of the anticipation of having a habitat conservation plan adopted during that implementation plan life, so that we're going to be able to align the actual operations, with the HCP, should it be adopted as planned, while still honoring our current FMP. And, it gets tricky when you're merging policies together. We knew this day would come when you're trying to, get really close to honoring your current plans and policies while simultaneously embracing what the policy work of the future is. So that's what we're trying to do there, but we are going to remodel them and reanalyze them. That's another interest that we have as far as harvest levels and setting the right harvest levels. So that was another consideration in doing that, because we are doing robust modeling now with the work for the FMP and HCP, et cetera.
And so the HCP, FMP we're talking about here today is for Western Oregon. So safe to assume that Sun Pass, Gilchrist is just going to extend the current one, rewrite theirs. What's happening? Yeah,
so the Gilchrist is not involved in the conversation at all. So the Eastern Region Forest Management Plan is a little bit different than our current, West Side plans. And that plan has been enduring now it's into its 3rd decade. And it is a little bit of a different structure where it currently uses decadal, goals and averages for harvest outputs and other outcomes in that plan itself. And that's what's guiding operations. So no, they're not in play with this work.
Okay. If there are no more questions for Ron or Jennifer on that, I guess the teed up next is Nick. Nick, marble murrelet content for us, Nick Palazzo.
Thanks, Barrett. Jason, can you pull that presentation up? If you can.
Yeah, give us just a moment over here.
Yeah. Want me to grab it?
No, we've got it. Just a second over here. Apologies.
Yeah, no worries. Well, so good morning, everybody. My name is Nick Palazzotto, and I serve as the Resource Support Unit Manager for the State Forest Division. Prior to recently taking this role, I was the staff wildlife biologist. Hence why I'm presenting this information today. And so today I'll be presenting an update on the development of an Endangered Species Management Plan, or ESMP for short, for marbled murrelets. And this is a new requirement under the State Endangered Species Act, following a recent uplisting from threatened to endangered status in Oregon. Next slide, please, sir. So in July of 2021, the Oregon Fish and Wildlife Commission voted to uplist murrelets from threatened to endangered. And the uplisting of the murrelet to endangered sets in motion a series of actions that must be taken by the commission, ODFW, ODF, and the board, most notably the development and approval of an endangered species management plan. And the process of development and final approval of the plan by the commission is required to be completed within 2 years. At the time of listing, the commission adopted mandatory survival guidelines that apply unless an agency has a commission-approved ESMP or an incidental take permit. The guidelines are what the commission considers necessary to ensure the survival of individual members of the species in the absence of a species management plan. The division has been implementing these requirements following their adoption as mandatory. The guidelines actually drew pretty heavily from our existing take avoidance policies, with 2 primary exceptions. One of which is a new requirement for consultation with ODFW on projects that interact with murrelet habitat. And another is a requirement for trash management measures in public use areas. Also, some additional context that warrants mention is that the State Endangered Species Act only applies to state land owning or managing agencies. It does not apply to federal, private, or tribal lands. Next slide, please, sir. And so within 4 months of the listing decision, the commission is required to determine if state land can play a role in conservation of the endangered species. If that determination is made, then the state land or managing agency must develop an endangered species management plan. So in its meeting in November, the commission identified ODF as an agency that manages murrelet habitat and thus can play a role. The next step then is for each agency to determine the role for their lands in the conservation of marbled murrelets. And as defined in statute here, conservation means the use of methods and procedures necessary to bring a species to the point at which such measures are no longer necessary. The role may include, but is not limited to, conservation, a contribution to conservation, or take avoidance. Next slide. And each agency has considerable discretion in determining the role that its lands can play. And in making this determination must balance several factors consistent with the biological aspects of the species management identified by ODFW and the statutory or constitutional obligations of the agencies, including that land statutory purpose. And thus the division is obligated to balance, statutory rules, statutory requirements, rules, policies applicable to management of state forests, social and economic impacts that conservation would have on the state, the conservation needs of the species, and the purpose of the lands, as well as the role of other ownership categories when determining the role of our lands. Next slide, please. So at the Board of Forestry's March 9th meeting, the division proposed to define the role of ODF managed lands as a contribution to conservation of marbled murrelets. And this contribution to conservation is designed to support stable or increasing populations and habitat trends. And it's based on our existing take avoidance policies for the species and other commitments under the our current forest management plan, as well as the survival guidelines themselves. The board approved the the definition and the proposed framework that we provided on March 9th. And we're now working on developing the full endangered species management plan. Next slide. And so a little bit about timelines and the relationship to the HCP itself and the FMP revision process that's underway. Within 18 months of the listing decision, which is by January 16th of next year, the division is required to develop and approve the plan and submit that plan to the commission for their review and approval. The commission is given an additional 6 months to review the submitted plan to determine whether the plan achieves the role that we defined for the land. Based on the biology of the species, the commission can modify the plan if necessary to be consistent with that role. And then they must approve the plan as submitted or modified within 24 months, which is by July 16th, 2023. So these statutory established timelines require the division to proceed with the development of this endangered species management plan while working on the habitat conservation plan and the associated forest management plan. But recall that, as Cindy mentioned earlier, the HCP must be completed by March 23rd. We'll have already had to submit our plan to the commission. Therefore, the ESMP will align with the current FMP, which is not connected to an incidental take permit. A commission-approved plan for the murrelet will supersede survival guidelines for the species, and also an incidental take permit issued by Fish and Wildlife Service under the Federal Endangered Species Act would be recognized by ODFW as a waiver of any state protection measures or requirements otherwise applicable to the actions allowed under the federal permit. So thus, an HCP would also effectively supersede or replace the endangered species management plan. Next slide, please. So just quick update then on next steps. We'll be bringing a status update to the board in July, just sort of here's where we're at this point. It's an opportunity to check in advance of submitting our final draft to the board for approval in November of this year. And then following that approval, it goes to the commission in January. And as I mentioned, they have to approve it by July of next year. Next slide. And with that, thanks for listening, and I'll take any questions anybody has.
Any questions for Nick? Yep, this is Barrett. Nick, on your 2 slides ago, you mentioned its its check as to its integration with the current FMP. And that would be upon approval in July of 2023. And do you mean to say the current as of today, or the whatever the extent FMP is at that time?
No, since we have to submit it before we know if we get an HCP and thus need a revised FMP, but we have to present it in the framework of our current forest management plan, not the current one at the time, but to the 2010 forest management plan.
And so the commission hasn't expressed an interest in any kind of future casting at all on that subject.
Well, we haven't discussed it with them because there isn't any legal wiggle room there. Right. Essentially, is the guidance that we've received from Department of Justice. And I mean, it's unfortunate timing of events because, 6 months later, we might be in a totally different framework. However, I mean, it's important to note any agency that's been identified by the commission has to have one of these plans, and it doesn't go away with an HCP. It just sort of gets shelved. And so it remains in place. And should something go wrong with the HCP or FMP, we have this plan in place that would apply.
Understood. Thanks. And
Yeah.
I apologize for mispronouncing your last name earlier. You're one which I've known how to pronounce for about 10 years. I practiced in front of a mirror so that I wouldn't get it wrong. And
I should just spell it phonetically.
no,
It's okay, no worries.
Yep, thanks, Nick. Good, go ahead.
Amanda with Associated Oregon Loggers. So I might put it a different way and just make sure that I'm understanding it correctly too, Nick. So from what I remember in sitting through all these meetings, is that, right now our current FMP utilizes take avoidance, right? And so we've been utilizing more or less optional standards, survival guide standards in our contracts for marbled murrelet. And really all this did was make those mandatory, but in all reality, there isn't going to be a whole lot of change as far as what is actually being done operationally on the ground. As far as connecting it to our current practices and the current FMP. And so it's just sort of, it's making it mandatory even though we're already doing it. So that's kind of what I remember. And then when we get the new HCP and the issuance of the federal incidental take permit, like you mentioned, we basically get that waiver, this gets shelved, and we follow the management practices associated with the new HCP and FMP, which will more or less supersede that management plan because it's got the federal coverage and whatnot. Is that more or less correct?
Yep, that is correct. As I said, the guidelines themselves pulled heavily from our existing policies because we're sort of out in front on murrelets at the state level. So they look to us for what take avoidance looks like. There were two exceptions. One is, we have been consulting with Fish and Wildlife Service for a decade now on activities in and near murrelet habitat. There's now an additional nexus with ODFW. So we've been consulting with them. It hasn't changed anything in terms of our operations, but it is an additional workload there. And then the other piece are some guidelines around public outreach and other trash management measures at public use areas. That's taken a little bit of scaling up work and sort of scoping work to get there, but that's been the only real change relative to our current operations.
Yeah, Nick. So basically, as far as the operator and purchaser is concerned, there really isn't a lot of change. It's more internal changes.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Thank you.
I see a hand up. Is that Greg?
Yes,
Yep.
thank you. A question for Nick. If the murrelet plan is approved and if it's in accordance with the HCP, is there a need for the take avoidance? Simple. That's my question.
So lacking in HCP, yes, we have to, as the survival guidelines state sort of what conservation looks like and what the purpose of those guidelines are, which is to avoid take of individual species or individual members of the species. So lacking in HCP, we live under take avoidance, meaning primarily that we're conducting surveys of any timber sale that is triggered under the protocol for the species. With an HCP, no, we move away from a take avoidance approach. We've made these conservation commitments to the species. We do some monitoring work, but it's no longer tied to our timber sale program. So very different framework for management.
Thank you.
Yeah, I see. I guess Lisa. Yes, go ahead, Lisa.
Thanks. I just am going back to what Amanda was talking about relative to performance measures and just trying to wrap my head around this whole process and how each section of it sits, I guess, in the FMP. And is it only the FMP that will have performance measures as compared to the HCP, or in this case, I understand that the Marble Murrelet plan would not, it's superseded by the HCP. So going back again, for performance measures, we talked a little bit about economic performance measures. What other performance measures, or could somebody in this room list an example of a few performance measures that one might see in the FMP that are a variety? In other words, economic, conservation, etc. I just wonder, relative to, for example, this Marble Murrelet plan, what the performance measure of that plan ever was. Is it just take avoidance and whatever that means? So could someone give me an example of some examples of performance measures?
Yeah, let me take a crack at it, and then maybe Ron or Bodie could come in and clean up behind me. But so, like, using Murrelets as an example, the HCP does have a number of hard commitments to each individual covered species. And so for Marble Murrelets, we've said we anticipate protecting this much existing habitat and growing this much additional habitat. And those are pretty fixed in the HCP. They could be brought into the performance measures, the suite of performance measures associated with a new forest management plan. So there's a number of commitments to a number of species, and the board may choose, under our current plan, for example, we have our, desired future condition complex. There's a certain percentage of the landscape that's designated as such, right? That goes away under a revised plan, but we could still pull the habitat commitments to covered species associated with old forests into those performance measures for the FMP. And that's part of that discussion we need to have with the board about, what suite of measures do you want to see? So what we've been trying to do is identify sort of the full range, a menu, if you will, of things that could be measured, that are measurable, in terms of economics, social values, and environmental values, of which Murrelet habitat would be one. And then the board is going to, I'm speculating here, but in all likelihood, take their pick from among the list of all the options available, with our recommendations, of course, but they'll take that into account and make decisions about, let's look at these 8 that reflect these values that we're interested in. And they would range, among the economic, the social, and the environment.
And those, and again, per Amanda, those are going to be recommendations from staff and not, and some public outreach, but not this body.
Well, I would think it would be the full suite of, so it's to some extent it's on staff to distill the public comments and SFAC and FTLAC, but to a lesser extent FTLAC, because they directly advise the board. But it's on us to distill those into, combined with our own thoughts. Here you go. Here are all the things we've heard. What is your preference?
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I note that, we have Kyle, Denise, and Jennifer teed up for the Fern Ridge AOP discussion, but we are at break time, and that coincides with when Lisa, you have to leave, is that right? if you're still on, I just wanted to,
I do, Barrett. Thank you.
okay, that, hey, hey, wait a minute. I don't have any staff, Lisa. That's not fair. Well, that's tough. I guess I'm not going to twist your arm to stay. I just wanted to give you a chance to say anything before you had to leave. And if not, thanks for jumping on and doing double duty, Lisa.
Yeah, no, I don't have anything to add. I really appreciate the conversation here today. I do wish that we could be a little bit more on the used as more of your kind of sounding boards, but I understand. But anyway, I will see you all in June, I think.
All right, thanks, Lisa.
Yep.
Keep up the good work. Okay, so would it be convenient to push to after break? Okay, let's take a, we'll go ahead and take a 15-minute break, which puts us at 10:40. So we'll see you all back here in 15.
No, you're inside. Okay.
Okay, folks, thanks for rejoining. Up next, we'll have, I guess, Kyle lead off a discussion on the SANIM 22 AOP Phase 2, and the reason we keep close tabs on this. It's obviously a really hugely interesting project, and it was one of the first AOP. It was kind of a revision and the first one to try and future cast a little bit about the future HCP commitments. So go ahead, Kyle, take it from here.
Thank you, Chair Barrett. Again, my name's Kyle Kopp, SANIM Unit Forester out of the North Cascade District for ODF. So as Barrett mentioned, my plan today is to kind of give a status update on the planning aspects, the operational aspects of Fern Ridge now that it is a sold sale. And then I'm going to kick it over to Jennifer Magby, who's going to kind of hit on some of the high level recreation, education, interpretation aspects of the project. So you guys probably remember this project we presented it a couple times at SFAC meetings. Pretty vigorous planning process went into this project. And we're at the point now where it's sold, it's active. So I want to bring you up to speed on that. It's again, just geographic awareness. I passed around a vicinity map and it's shared up on the screen for the virtual folks. It's 30 miles east of Salem. Prior to the 2020 Labor Day fires, this area, Shelburne Falls, was the recreational gem of the SANIM State Forest, most visited. Moderate to high severity fire went through there, and now we're here today. So the sale sold on March 3rd. So just a month ago, had 2 bidders, and it sold for $502 per 1,000 board feet. And the estimated volume coming off this project is 850,000 board feet. So just estimated gross value, depending on kind of how it gets cut out, how it scales out, it's right around $425,000. 2/3 of that will be going to Marion County. So that's kind of the volume value aspect. It did sell to Logco Industries, which I think is kind of a good side story in itself, as this is a small up and coming logger out of Philomath area. He's actually been working for us since the fires. He was one of the contractors that did some of the initial work order contracts to repair roads and fix culverts on the forest. He's done some of our direct negotiated 342 small salvage sales, just kind of clean up. And it's a good story for him because it's a perfect small 14 acres, a little bit of hazard tree work, a little bit of project work, not too big where he has to overextend himself, and he can kind of start to get in the industry more and more. So we held a pre-work with him. His name's Ethan, owns the company, and his lead operator. It was a very thorough pre-work compared to some of the other timber sales with the kind of the planning on this sale and the individual nuances with each piece of it. We wanted to really go through every nut and bolt of the contract and kind of what our vision was, what we wanted the outcome to be. So we sat down with myself, the State Forest Unit Manager out of SANIM right now, our contract administrator, and Jamal Reb, who's the REI planning specialist, and really just went through, controlled felling in areas up here. So I'm kind of moving the mouse, showing you kind of where we talked about in the pre-work around the campground, the infrastructure of where we've marked hazard trees that need to come down, but they need to, use tree jacks, use wedges, and really directionally fell every tree. So we discussed controlled felling a lot. We discussed additional down wood to be left in the unit, as opposed to another timber sale where, because of this one and the proximity to Oregon slender salamander, kind of how we wanted down wood distributed, how we wanted the snags and the leaf tree requirements as part of the salvage policy, and how we want those really oriented in the unit away from roads where people are going to congregate. Where the unit's at right here. I can zoom in on this a little bit. Where the unit's at, there's actually a trail that comes up from the end of the 200 road and across Shelburne Creek and comes right up to the edge of the unit. And this is going to be an area, this intersection where people are probably going to congregate. This is kind of looking out into the future where we would expect some REI interpretive kiosks, kind of talking about the post-fire management unit, the understory planted unit, and the natural regen unit, kind of that spot. And so we definitely don't want to, you know, focus all the leaf trees in that area where you'd have standing dead trees above where people are going to congregate. So a lot of discussions on that about this has to be very carefully thought out. And so we also talked about the hazard tree mitigation area, you know, how it's not going to be the same partial cut throughout all of this cross-hatched road hazard tree mitigation area. Down here, it was highly affected by the fire. Plus you have steep rocky slopes above the road. So, you know, kind of walked him through with the map, and he's looking at it of exactly, this is going to have to be a fairly heavy, you know, take prescription above the hill to make sure nothing's coming down on anyone coming down the road or near the trails going into Shelburne Falls. Where as you get into the backside here is more lower severity, might be some smaller hemlocks, shallow roots, things that he'll have to address and he'll have to look at. But we're basically wanting a tree here, tree there on that type. Whereas the bottom, it's going to be more of a heavier take to just mitigate any of those risks. So, you know, we had Jamal there, like I said, paying attention to some of the specifications in the timber sale contract that just really, so that the logger knows, you know, that he is responsible for repairing the trail tread to what it was post or pre-harvest, you know, protecting any recreation infrastructure, things like that. Just really kind of having him hone in on exactly what is expected of him for this operation. So currently the felling has begun this week. They're starting in with hand cutters in the unit here, and then they're going to move on to some of the roadside hazard treatment once they're done felling the unit. So that's just begun this week. We discussed the project work that's associated with this sale, which is just above the upper Shelburne Falls right here on the creek. There's an old road bed that actually has an old culvert, and to help enhance the local resident cutthroat trout population that we have here above the falls, we're going to vacate that road and pull that culvert to enhance this Shelburne Creek. And so we discussed that with them. There is an in-water work period that ODF&W adheres to. And so that's July 15th through I think early September. So really smaller operation, but kind of going to take it slow. I'm expecting the harvesting and the project work side of things to be done mid to late summer. And then really going to kind of work hand in hand with the REI staff of once the harvesting operation, the safety point is done, and now then it's kind of a recreation focused kind of restoration, how to get the trails and everything back to kind of how we want to go forward in the future with that. Did discuss briefly trying to organize a field tour for the SVAC out to the Fern Ridge. We were thinking June. I was thinking that might be a little tight. We might be at the tail end of the operation. It might be just, you know, maybe the fall one would be a little better once we have time to, for sure the operation will be done. We'll have some time to kind of go in there and do some recreation restoration projects, things like that. Have a little bit better idea of how we want some of the education and interp opportunities allocated around the project there. That's really in a nutshell what my status update is for the operational side. And I guess I'll, unless there's any questions on that, kick it to Jennifer for an REI update. Yep.
What's your expiration date?
It's the end of this calendar year, so December 31st, 2022.
Amanda with AOL. Kyle, can you tell us what the deterioration looks like of the wood right now?
So on that timber type in Shelburne Falls areas, I would say on an average DBH of 24 plus. So thick bark Doug fir that actually survived the fire fairly well. Before the sale auctioned, you could walk up around there and see that a lot of purchasers were going around with hatchets and chopping off bark to see if cambium was still good. And it was. So it's kind of like real heavy bark scorch, some needle loss, and that's definitely where the high severity, moderate severity, but it wasn't complete char into the cambium to the point where the wood was no good. And I think that's why we got $500 a thousand still.
Yeah, and I've noticed that a lot as well. I think a lot of that because the fires were so fast moving, being wind driven.
Right.
That you didn't get as much of that scorch inward. So that's great. One other question related to the operations, and I'm failing to remember in the AOP revision there, in the IP revision, how was future logger safety considered in those stands that are natural regen and underplanted?
Future logger safety. So
yeah,
we're
so if those stands are to be harvested in the future, and you have, you got new trees coming up,
right.
But you have a lot of standing dead remaining because there is only one area salvage unit. How was future operator safety considered in those decisions?
First and foremost, we did the roadside hazard treatment around those areas. So it will extend into those, the units with the understory planting and the no touch, just a little bit off the road surrounding them. But this is an area that's in a draft habitat conservation area. So not expecting at the current age of the stand in the current forest management plan, it was desired future condition layered. So we've thinned it in the past before. I don't see a final harvest in some of those areas, or, maybe potentially a future thinning. By then, I would hope anything that was going to come down has already done it, but it would be like any other operation with loggers or fallers going into it. It'd just be hit on a swivel and mitigate any hazards as they see them.
Great. No more questions for Kyle. Morning, Jennifer. Go right ahead.
Good morning. Jennifer Magby. I'm the director of the Tillamook Forest Center. Unfortunately, Denise Berkshire, our interpretation education coordinator who's working on the Santiam project, wasn't able to join this meeting today, but she did share her update with me, so I can present that to you. So she has hired a professional photographer to document the Fern Ridge Demonstration Forest project prior to timber harvest. This will provide baseline imagery for comparison for use in future interpretive programs. She is continuing to implement the forest recovery photo monitoring with the picture post at designated recreation areas. And once the timber harvest is completed at the demonstration forest plot, a picture post will also be installed at that area to capture change over time as well. She's been on the field, as Kyle mentioned, with him and the recreation staff. And so content and locations have been identified for temporary interpretive signage at the Fern Ridge Demonstration Forest location and also in the Shellberg's parking area. The goal is to have these temporary signage boards, I think we'll call them, in place prior to reopening in July of 2023. And permanent signage and other interpretive options will occur in the future with the development of the interpretive master plan. Additionally, the Santiam State Forest Recreation Guide will be updated once we've restored some capacity to our interpretive and education team. And then staff will be looking for additional opportunities to highlight the demonstration forest in the short term prior to the finalized interpretive master plan. So that is the report from interpretation and education.
Good. Any questions for Jennifer? Yeah, go right ahead, Amanda.
Amanda Astor with AOL again. So is there any way, Jennifer, that you can give us a high level idea of sort of the topics that are going to be covered on those interpretive signs? I'm thinking public safety, climate change, wildfire. Can you give us an idea of kind of what ODF is planning on focusing on in those?
I don't have the full comprehensive scope on those, but I can say that there will be information related to the boundaries and what is ODF land and neighboring land to give people some perspective as they're at those locations, because that is a checkerboarded area. And there will be safety information as well. Other content I think is still yet to be developed. It's perhaps something Denise could answer if she's here, but I don't have her comprehensive notes on that portion of the plan.
On that point, I'm not sure if Laura has anything to add, but I know there's a lot of opportunity here because of the different prescriptions in these blocks, and the objective is to bring the public in and engage them in a way where they can watch the different types of approaches, and they're dramatically different, and learn to appreciate the complexity and the different choices that were made out there, and it should be a good opportunity.
Yeah, and some of that deeper future work, permanent installations, will be part of the interpretive master planning process.
Yeah, and I might jump in here. Barrett, you're Laura Frederickson, Recreation, Education, and Interpretation Manager. And you're exactly right, Barrett. I mean, one of the major objectives with the information boards, particularly the one that's right down on the trail system, is to demonstrate the different prescriptions on the land, and to help the visitor understand just what those prescriptions are and the reasons why we chose to implement those certain prescriptions. So it's just, again, you know, I would say the overarching goal of all of our education and interpretation activities is really helping the visitor understand more thoroughly active forest management, the reason behind it, and also, as Jennifer mentioned, that we distinguish ourselves from other land managers in the area. Because if I've learned one thing in this position, there is very widespread misunderstanding in terms of ODF and other land managers within within close proximity. So that certainly would be some of the overall messaging. But you're absolutely right. Thank you, Barrett.
So yeah, Mike Tody, and then Mike McKibben after that. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to take a moment and recognize the department and specifically the folks on the SANIAM that work there. I mean, the Labor Day fires affected a massive amount of land and a number of fires across the state, and that west slope of the Cascades in particular. And there's a significant part of the SANIAM that is already reopened to public recreation and use, including hunting. And as we compare that to massive parts of the federal forests that are still working through NEPA, working through planning, trying to do operations, it's significantly different. Hats off to folks there for getting that done.
Mike, go ahead. Mike McKibben. Oh, I think we lost you, Mike. Are you there? Okay, if you could. Good. Any other questions for Jennifer or Kyle on the Fern Ridge project? And hopefully we'll get Mike McKibben back up and we can hear his question as soon as he's able. Let's see, that leads us into Jest and Buttress. Are you?
Derek.
Is that? Oh, I skipped a line, sorry. Okay. I skipped, sorry, Derek. Go ahead.
Yeah, so it'll just be a moment here as we get the PowerPoint presentation up, and fingers crossed, Mike will actually be able to come back in the meantime. So if not,
I can go ahead and get started. Apparently that went faster than I thought. Okay, so I'm going to give a brief overview of the fiscal 23 AOPs. And so just good morning, everyone. My name is Derek Bangs and I work in the Planning and Coordination Unit. I have a lot of information on these slides. My plan going through them will be to pause at the end of each slide for any questions or comments. I'll be presenting this in a similar format from what I've done in years past, where I go through a high-level overview of the planned harvest activities, project work, reforestation projects, and planned recreation projects. I will then go into some of the resource considerations, which is a focus on items that have come in the past during the public comment period, or we anticipate will come up this year specifically due to ongoing policy work. All right, so to start things off with an overview of the planned harvest activities within the fiscal 23 plan. For a bit of context on this first slide, our IP harvest target level is 201 to 208 million board feet, with North Cascade having an 8 to 15 million board foot range. So we're falling solidly in the middle of that range. Just a reminder to folks, the IP target is a rolling average. So each year we adjust harvest values up or down to account for the previous year's total. We're tracking pretty much right on our rolling average right now in the less than 1% range for all of the districts. And then as was discussed earlier, we're at the tail end of those implementation plans. And so for that being approximately 10-year average, we're within 1% of that total. Another thing to highlight here is the amount of thinning that's occurring across the division. Much the same as last year, we're looking at around 2,000 acres of thinning in the Northwest Oregon area. The majority of this is young stand thinnings. On the revenue side of things, we're looking at close to 1.5 million headed towards common school lands and around 78 million net revenue coming off Board of Forestry lands, which is split on the screen between county and ODF shares. For context, this is about 7 million more than we planned last year. The discrepancy is primarily last year there was a dip in volume as the IP volumes were being balanced out, as was mentioned.
Audience wasn't able to see that slide or anything.
Uh-oh.
Just pause here. Just
okay.
Where we think it's appropriate.
Sure. So I'll give a second there. As I said earlier, the key messages here, we're shooting for that planned target volume of 204 million board feet, which is right in the range for the IPs, and then the totals there on the bottom. Partial cut, I wanted to highlight just how much partial cut we were doing, which was around 2,000 acres. And then as I went through the county revenue pieces and the CSL piece. So I'll pause here for a little bit and see if there's any questions or comments, or if Mike was able to come back in, if we needed to do a go back on the previous one.
This is Jason with Public Affairs. We'll get through this presentation and handle questions and comments on that. And then for anyone having technical difficulties during the Fern Ridge presentation, we can go back to that.
Okay. All right, seeing no questions on this slide. On to planned project work. So please note here that the total project costs include both those that were listed under the timber sales, as well as those associated with work order contracts that were directly related to those sales. The project work costs are pretty close to the average, with a slight increase that is primarily due to the increased project costs in North Cascade related to recovery from fire. For those of you that are unfamiliar with the project work order verbiage, the intent of these are to accomplish the project work outside of the timber sale contract. This allows us to complete the project work earlier and potentially sell a timber sale with little to no project work, which allows the mills to better play the market and hopefully results in a larger bid up for sales. One item to note here is that Tillamook miles are significantly lower than in past years. Tillamook generally averages around 30 to 60 miles of improvement. The reason for the drop in miles is that we're utilizing similar haul routes as have been used in previous sale plans. These may increase as we look at some of the sales for specific projects, but these would primarily be culvert work, ditch work, et cetera.
Derek, can I ask on that slide, what is there a standout reason for North Cascade having such a high percentage of project cost to revenue? It's atypical.
A lot of this is it's recovery from the fire piece, and so a lot of that stuff there is around the repair from those fires. You'll burn out culverts, having to put some rock down in places that we might not have put down previous because of those fire related. That's crazy.
Yeah, thank you.
This is Kyle. I think that work order contract number might be wrong. I don't think it's that high. But I could be mistaken. I think it was maybe transposed. I think ours is 400,000. I don't know.
I'll double check that. Go ahead, Lisa.
Thanks. Just same kind of question Barrett asked. Just what do you usually, what's your goal for what you're gonna pay for new roads and road improvements for each work set? Is it 5%, 7%, 8%? I mean, obviously you integrate that into what you want the bids to be, but what do you usually spend for each?
So it's pretty highly dependent on what the sale needs. And so, it can be, these projects here can range from rock crushing to new road construction to road improvement. If a sale doesn't require rock crushing, or if it does, can be the difference of $600,000. And so that can be a pretty big change in that project cost. We want to try to keep our project costs as low as possible, both for, our own revenues as well as revenues to the counties, but we also need to be able to make sure that we're not having a damaged resource out there. And so a lot of times those project costs are as low as we can possibly get them. But if we need to have higher costs because of, we need to crush more rock or we need to do road improvement in order to get the wood out, then that's what we're going to do to protect the resource at the same time.
Okay, thank you.
Amanda has a question.
Yeah, just a quick question. Has ODF started to see any of the inflationary costs, last year or 2 years ago compared to this information?
Yeah, especially with, so yes, is the short answer, especially with gas prices. And so we have started looking at some of our costs and then actually increasing what we put in our contracts because of that, both for project costs as well as for hauling costs for timber sales. And so, yeah, we've seen that pretty dramatically in some places, not as much in others, but yes, we have started seeing that already.
So just a follow up then, are you guys expecting to see that project cost as a % of gross revenue potentially increase more as, obviously this is speculative to a certain extent, but are you guys kind of anticipating that?
Yeah, you will to a point. In some ways, it's slightly been offset by the fact that the timber prices are also going up. And so as timber prices go up, that project number would go down. As inflation goes up, the project number would go up. And so to somewhat, I think the answer is yes. It just depends which one goes up faster. My guess would be that there's somewhat of a ceiling on the timber prices going up, as probably not as much for the inflationary number, but that it's definitely speculative.
Follow up. Great. This is Kyle Cup. Derek, just so people can be clear. So I'm looking at 23 for North Cascade. It's for project costs. It's 801,605 and work orders of 400. So I think Tillamook and North Cascade got flip flopped.
Yeah.
Kind of scared me. I didn't know about the 17 miles of road we were building. But it makes sense for Tillamook. So.
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Would you say that's flip-flopped, including the percent, so that would skew the percent of volume? In other words, is it footed in a way, or is it just?
I'll double check these numbers, then I'll send something out to the committee here that that shows the correct numbers.
Thank you.
Was there any other questions before I move on? Okay. All right, a reforestation roll-up. So again, the big deal here is the North Cascade District. To the surprise of no one, the reforestation efforts there will greatly eclipse what has been performed on average in the past due to the replanting efforts post-Labor Day fires. This is highlighted in both the initial acres of planting as well as the acres of release plant. The numbers for the other districts are similar to the average we've seen in the past. So for those of you that may not remember, last year at this meeting for SFAC, I spoke to how we recently stood up our Recreation, Education, and Interpretation, or REI unit, which centralized the planning for recreation across the entire division. The goal for the year was for them to start looking at recreation projects in a more holistic view and begin to look at some of the long-term plans across the division on where to place priorities. This got derailed a bit with the workload associated with the assessment of North Cascade unit post-Labor Day fires and the timing of getting everyone onboarded and trained up. This coming year, we're looking at picking up where we left off here with finishing some of the work items that were identified in the Santiam Forest, where we're repairing some of the damage that occurred during the Labor Day fires. Other projects include trail inventory, assessment and maintenance, infrastructure repair, and continuation and/or completion of projects from prior AOPs. This year, if you look at the summary documents, we've broken them up into two types: planning and implementation. For the implementation projects, these are projects where the goal is to complete them this year. The planning projects are ones where we're doing some outreach work or, for instance, trying to look for some grant funding to pick up some of the costs. The focus will not be on completing those projects, but rather completing some of the internal workings of those projects and working with our internal and external partners on firming up some of the locations. Just to get a little more meat on the bone on this, I'm just going to kind of go through each of the districts here and hit some key items that each district is looking at. So for Astoria, there's a demo of the existing flush toilet facility at the Spruce Run Campground. We're also going to be pursuing some funding opportunities for replacement vault toilet facility at this location. Forest Grove, continuation of the Wilson River Trail Segment D. This project also includes bridge construction. Tillamook, looking at some replacement bridge projects. North Cascade, 2 bridge replacements and some planned reroutes of trails damaged during the Labor Day fire. And West Oregon, 1.5 miles of reroutes planned for the Black Rock mountain bike trail system. In addition to these projects, the recreation unit will be focused on maintaining existing facilities and working with the districts on sales with recreational resources within or in proximity to these sales. I'll pause a second here and see if anybody has any questions.
And where were you going to shift next? You have more on recreation here?
So I have a little more after this. I go into some of the resource considerations. This is the primary slide that discusses the recreation piece. If you have any questions, I can dive into it in more detail.
Sure. I had a question just on the recreation AOP focus. I think probably the slide. So just for the committee's benefit, I think at this level, we hear a lot of good stories about integration and between harvest and sale plans and recreation, and certainly I hear the same things, the same positive stories here on anytime I'm on the campus, but it hasn't been universal in this it doesn't always work that well, and I think just the committee should understand there's some significant impacts in this AOP and some of the decision making and the ways these decisions were undertaken that really represented a breakdown. And I think leadership understands that. They're working on improved planning. But I think yeah, I just trying to think of how to approach it. I think a good way to do this would be to look at a particular sale and, you know, just try and put you in the shoes of the kind of the recreation community, especially trail-based recreation. And I wonder if I don't want to get ahead of you, Andy. You know, you've been involved in some of the conversations about some of that engagement out of the Tillamook district in particular. Understanding there's some work been done on that already, but since we are in this public comment period, you know, I'd like to look at that Diamond Wallow sale a little bit, and maybe you can guide me on when would be the best time to insert that into your.
Yeah, so after this, I go into some of the resource considerations, and one of the resource considerations I do go into a little more detail on is specifically sales with the recreation projects within or adjacent to the sales. Because I wanted to call that out to the committee and just get some input.
Perfect, thank you. We have not seeing any other questions, so yeah, go right ahead.
Okay. All right, so rolling on to resource considerations. The next few slides are a focus on items that have come up in the past during the public comment period, or we anticipate to come up this year specifically due to ongoing policy work. So start off with aquatic and riparian enhancement. Every year we screen all of our sales for adjacent fish streams and schedule field visits as necessary with our staff stream specialists to identify areas that would most benefit from enhancement activities. This year, 20 sales were identified that have the potential for enhancement projects. As sale layout begins with these sales, our staff stream specialists will work with the district to potentially narrow down this list and develop potential projects. Please note that some of these sales are alternates, and assuming these sales remain as alternates, the field review of them would occur when they move up to primaries in subsequent years. Thinning and terrestrial anchor sites. So for those of you that may not be aware, terrestrial anchor sites are habitat areas intended to benefit terrestrial wildlife species of concern, especially those associated with older forest conditions. These areas have been geographically identified across the landscape. This year, we have 2 partial cuts planned in our terrestrial anchor sites. One is a primary sale and one is an alternate. Both of these sales, the district and biologists will work closely together to develop appropriate prescriptions. Yep, just if anybody has a question, chime in.
So I need just a quick go back to your previous slide on the aquatic riparian enhancement. Is that when you're doing those types of either sticks and cricks or those types of enhancements, are those only being targeted on streams where there's listed species?
So no, they're not only being targeted, but that tends to be a priority where they're located. And so a certain amount of it is just where we can allocate resources, time and effort. You know, those streams that are coho related, for instance, generally get elevated above trout, but that doesn't mean that we don't do a trout stream if it's available, especially if it's opportunistic while we're in there, where we can do so. So we do evaluate them for both. All right, so moving on, biological assessments. When we are operating within any occupied habitat, our biologists put together a biological assessment which explains our intended operations and describes the habitat on site and goes into detail on the potential risks to the species of concern in the area of our intended operation. Initial biological assessments will be compiled on these sales and sent to Fish and Wildlife Service for review. This year, we're looking at a total of 5 sales where a biological assessment will be required. 3 of these are primary sales and 2 of them are alternates. The majority of these are owl sites with 2 sales in the Western Oregon district, where we're planning to thin portions of the buffer adjacent to the marbled murrelet managed areas.
I don't know what else you have to say.
Go ahead, Amanda.
Go ahead, Amanda.
Amanda with Associated Oregon Loggers. So not sure if this is the right slide for this question, but it's come to our attention that it seems like future planning for HCAs and RCAs are being included in these AOPs. And I know we had the discussion earlier about the IP revisions incorporating HCP and FMP principles being for 24, 25, recognizing that current IPs do not fall under, that future cast, it's the current FMP. Can you describe if HCAs and RCAs are being incorporated into AOPs, why and how that isn't pre-decisional?
Yep, I can do that with the very next slide.
Okay. See, I wasn't sure.
It was a good lead in. All right, so a key consideration for the fiscal 23 AOP is that the State Forest Division is currently undergoing a large-scale policy development process to draft a habitat conservation plan as directed by the Board of Forestry in October of 2020. For those of you that may not be aware, a habitat conservation plan, often referred to as an HCP, is a mechanism to programmatically comply with the Federal Endangered Species Act. This strategy is different than the take avoidance strategy that we currently use. As the division plans for the potential transition to an HCP, the approach to the fiscal 23 AOPs on all districts except for Klamath Falls, which is outside of the draft HCP permit area, is to meet current implementation plan annual harvest objectives in alignment with the approved forest management plan while considering the goals and strategies of the draft HCP. One of the larger conservation strategies in the draft habitat conservation plan is to designate habitat conservation areas. For this fiscal year, we planned our harvest activities with these draft habitat conservation areas in mind. This resulted in no planned modified clear-cut harvest within these areas for fiscal 23. There are a few partial cut areas within these areas that were reviewed with our biologists and will be designed to improve wildlife habitat consistent with the long-term goals of the habitat conservation areas. So to address your question specifically, what we did was we gave ourselves a framework within this year to say we need to meet all of the goals of our current management plan and then look at these draft habitat conservation areas especially and see, can we still meet the goals of our current management plan while we also consider these draft areas, so not sacrificing our current management plan. And we were able to do so with this plan. The thinning projects that are planned here would be projects that would be thinned under the DFC complex under our current plan, and so it coincided with them. And then we were able to meet this to where we're not putting the habitat conservation plan in any jeopardy at the same time as meeting all of our conservation goals, and then have the same harvest levels as what we had planned during the implementation plan.
Yeah, just a quick follow-up from Amanda. I guess I have a different opinion of what would and wouldn't jeopardize the HCP. I really do not feel like, the decision to be pre-decisional, that NEPA is not complete. And therefore, it is illegal to make pre-decisional decisions on management activities. And so, we're just frustrated at the tactic that the department has taken. I understand that you guys can do whatever fits under the current FMP, but just want to get on the record that we don't think that it was appropriate to utilize future HCAs in the planning process.
Can I ask Amanda, what kind of, just for clarification, what kind of jeopardy do you think this would put the department in with the services being pre-decisional? What pre-decisional moves you think would put the HCP in jeopardy?
Well, I don't think that, if ODF chose not to utilize HCAs in the decision-making for the AOPs, I don't feel that would have put ODF in any jeopardy.
Oh, I see.
with with the HCP process. So basically they went over and above when they didn't have to, which again it's fine. It's just the HCP is not set in stone, and therefore it shouldn't have been utilized in my opinion.
There's no other committee comments. It is a tough balancing act because, on the other side of this, the table, the department could be accused of acting in kind of bad faith or being excessively opportunistic about rushing into areas, to get them while you can, at this moment. And so you're trying to maintain some kind of good faith partnership concept around what's likely to become HCA's. I'm not speaking for you guys. That's what I've witnessed. I don't know, Andy or Ron, if you want to.
Yeah, Barrett, and I'd say back to Derek's point too, in the department taking a look at that, if we had looked at that and we weren't able to meet the objectives and align with the current management plan, then I think we would have found ourselves in that area in between. But starting with the filter of, can we do what we would normally do to meet the intent of our annual harvest objectives and the implementation of the current forest management plan? And in doing that, can we also honor what we anticipate these future HCA's to look like? And if so, let's do that. And in this case, we were able to do it. Now, had the planning team looked at that and just said, wow, we just can't get there, it doesn't work, then we probably would have found ourselves with more operations within an HCA. But in my mind, we were able to put the overlays on there and still meet the intent of the current plan.
If I might jump in, it's also worth noting that there were 3 prior years, the 2020s through the 22s, where we didn't apply this lens, although we had draft HCA's in place. So we've already done, and the HCA's included clear cuts from years prior. So, we have done a bunch of that already. And this was the year that we tried to think about how to navigate both at once.
Okay. Now on to what we had discussed earlier. So as a working forest, it's inevitable that as we plan future timber harvest, there's an interaction with our growing recreational infrastructure. This is further compounded when we are in a transitional period between our current management plan and the habitat conservation plan goals. This year, we have a number of sales with recreational resources within or adjacent to some of our planned timber harvests. These range from thinning stands adjacent to trails, road use conflicts on popular recreational routes, to modified clear-cut harvest with trails present within the sale boundaries. Managing Oregon State Forest for multiple uses is oftentimes a balancing act. Appreciating that a portion of the associated timber harvest revenues support recreation trails, facilities, and infrastructures across state forests. The Department of Forestry recognizes that timber harvest can and often do change the trail setting on the landscape and the use experience for trail enthusiasts. ODF has employed many different methods to minimize disruption to trail access, as well as impacts to both trail setting and visitor experience. These strategies have included implementing trail buffers, strategic location of legacy structures like green trees and snags along trail corridors, managing timber sale timing to reduce closure periods, restricting the number of trail crossings made by operations during harvest, and writing trail protection and restoration language into timber sale contracts. In addition to these items, while we are operating in areas with recreational infrastructure, we're looking for recreational opportunities in proximity to these locations. These are opportunities to adjust trail locations to increase trail durability and lower maintenance costs, as well as to evaluate the area for future improvements. This year, like I said, there was quite a number of sales with trails adjacent. Unsurprisingly, the bulk of these are in the Tillamook district, which is also where the bulk of our trail system is located. One question that I wanted to bring to the committee here is, what's the best way to communicate, out on both the activity that's planned in these areas, as well as the overall need of the department to do this work. As we proceed, these areas that have recreational infrastructure in them, especially those areas that are outside of habitat conservation areas, we're going to have management activities within those stands. And we need to be able to do so in order to continue to meet our balanced approach.
Yeah, so I guess this is where I would pick up, everything you just said. That's the regime I think that most of the organized kind of trail community has embraced for the last life of the last plan. Kind of eagerly participating in a working forest and communicating to users what that means. But as an example, Hood River County Forestry Department has forest lands with recreation resources, and their intent statement and legislation for those acres are primarily for the purpose of generating revenue. And I was in a meeting last week with the forestry manager there who said that he would not include any language in a sale contract or modify sale boundaries in a way that would decrease the value of the sale in any way. And it struck me because that's virtually the identical language that we've heard out of Tillamook this year. Not in public settings, but if there's no opportunity to go in and talk about trail restoration language or directional falling or alternate sales, in particular focus is probably the highest impact sale I've seen in 25 years of public engagement out there, near one of the most active recreation areas in the forest. So it was just a surprising level of discordance with the rest of the culture in the other districts, discordance with the language coming out of the campus here. And I don't think it reflects what SBAC has thought has been going on out there either. In addition, inexplicably this year, the slightly obviously dysfunctional but customary operation way that recreation AOP projects were generated, after that AOP pre-work was done by rec staff, who I've been pestering about this for months, so I apologize to everybody on the call who's had to put up with me. The determination was made that that process just wasn't optimized, so those AOP projects were pulled. It didn't initiate a transition period to generate a more responsible, kind of healthy AOP development process. It just, those projects were stopped. So again, it's not the kind of thing we would see in any other district in my experience.
And I could speak a little bit to the projects. I was on the group that was discussing that with our recreation group. So the couple of projects that were pulled were specific because there was either a threatened endangered species issue with the project, to where they were proposing to clear cut inside of a marble murrelet management area, or there were projects where there's planned timber sale operations in the next year or two. And so the idea was that we wouldn't want to go out and build a trail and then the next year have a clear cut operation that would then potentially have the same type of potential public conflict issues. And so when we identified those, when we screened them and said, hey, there's a planned operation here. One of them actually was a planned quarry operation. And so rather than build a trail and then put dynamite in it and blow it up the next year, we said, let's push pause on this until after this operation is done, then reevaluate where this trail system should go. And so that was those were the two projects. There was two specific trail projects, one that had a timber sale, one that had a quarry, and then there was a third one where there was inside of the marmoret management area, which was in the Cook Creek area.
Yeah, that's perfectly familiar. I mean, that's been the operating regime for many years. And so those projects typically, excuse me, can adapt and shift, modify. It's basically a nonstop process of working with sales, future sales, potential sales. That's not unusual. Those discussions have happened. And have never resulted in this kind of a reaction. So, that's no sense. It would not be helpful to just continue to hijack the rest of the meeting on this particular topic and engage the public on this, and so you get more of that kind of feedback if it's important to folks, and we think it will be.
One thing I can speak to is, so I'm working personally with, Randy, who's the head of the recreation unit there. We're trying to streamline the process a little bit so that what we're doing is making these screenings up front. What kind of we recognized, especially during this AOP year, was that we were going out, we were meeting with the community to pre-identify some of these locations. We'd get feedback, we'd get emotional support behind some of them, and then we do our own internal screening and then see if something came up where it's kind of too late. We're trying to flip that so that we're doing some of these screenings up front before we start going out and doing that outreach, so that we've already screened some of these things. So if there was something that was going to put a halt to something, we've identified that before we're going out and trying to get community support for that trail system, so that we're not in these similar situations going forward.
Yep, and that's perfectly understandable, and I appreciate the evolution and the integrating the planning approaches from both sides, and that getting the timing right is smart. Just would have preferred a transition period there so that we didn't run into a collision in this particular year, all affecting AOPs and this particular sale. I don't know if we probably won't have. Well, Jason, go ahead and could you put that slide up really quick, and this just for the. It's a little abstract. I think
The map.
I think I emailed you a map. Yeah.
While we can do that while I'm pulling that up. Why Joe Travers has his hand up as well from the Tillamook district.
Okay, let's. Good. But let's throw that map up, and it's a little abstract, conversation for the rest of the committee.
So can I make a comment for a second, please?
Yes, if we can get this map up here, then this will provide some context.
Okay. I'm just gonna say, Barrett, I disagree with your characterization of what you said about Tillamook, and I don't know who you talked to in Tillamook. But I don't want to get into a debate, but I say I disagree with the comments about that there's no contract language or that we're not working with them. I don't think that was fair, and I appreciate your comments, the collision or whatever, and how the AOP worked as part of workforce futuring and trying to come up with, process. The process, wasn't the best, and we're working to improve that. And I'll just leave it at that.
I appreciate that, and I understand that my comments were pointed, and I respect, that. It hits close to home for you. We have a short time here to engage the SFAC in this kind of discussion, so it can end up being a little more pointed than normal. But I'll just say I haven't seen these kind of steps and these kind of results ever. So in this particular sale, this particular slide. We have, probably one of the most concentrated recreation use areas, And this represents a sail that basically dominates a nice section of non-motorized trail and motorized trail here, converting to road, where we typically have lots of discussion about maybe even alternate sails or alternate plans. And the degree of road building in this particular sail per acre is very unusual. So, you know, this is the one that got our attention, and yeah, I guess I just won't. I'm afraid it's too complicated to really tie up the rest of the meeting on, but pretty important subjects for the recreation, especially the trail recreation community. So again, no problem with the idea of a working forest, or no one's asking for forested buffers next to trails for sure, none of that, but we'll keep the conversation going.
I do want to point out on this particular one, as you were talking about the road construction, a lot of these roads are being constructed on old roads, old road grades.
Yeah.
And if you look at, you know, this is a good map where it shows the topology. There's a number of really steep points here that we're trying to access because if you don't get up to the top of that ridge, you cannot log that stand.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the reasons for the road infrastructure here, and especially when you see the roads winding so much, the reason they're winding around so much is that it's too steep to just go from point A to point B in a straight line. And that's a problem that Tillamook has kind of all over the district, because it's much steeper terrain than maybe you'd see on some of the other districts.
Yep, and I've been walking across that hillside since 1965. So I know that hill very well, and I know where those grades are, and we live with that concept every day, all across the district, the state forest. So very true. Oh yes, thanks, Jason.
So Jason, I see there's a couple hands up. You want to go ahead and call on them in order as needed?
Sure. Lisa. Lisa, did you have a question?
I'm sorry, I forgot to unmute. Could you put the map up again, please?
Sure. Hold on just a minute.
Thank you.
Sorry, Stan, why don't you go ahead and start your question, and we'll work on getting that back up.
Okay, well, I wanted a little clarification on the map because as Barrett mentioned, he said it was kind of complex, and since it didn't show what the red lines were, what the pink lines were, what the black lines were, I just wanted to have a better understanding of what we were even talking about. And the second thing I was going to ask is just, yeah, okay, because I don't see a legend that I can read. Okay, there we go. Thank you.
I can speak to it a little bit, Lisa. So the black dashed line is the planned construction, and then the colored lines are the trails.
Okay, so the colored lines are trails and the black spotted lines, and then the white lines are roads. That's great. I just, you know, as a non-motorized user, I just want to reiterate, and this isn't, you know, there's 21 miles of walking trails in Astoria. And I don't know if they've increased in the years I've been in this group, but if they have, it's a very small percentage. I'm not sure, you know, what we all have to do to get there to be more. I ride and hike through clear cuts all the time. So I don't understand why we don't create trail systems after a clear cut, at least lay them out, plan them, because they're never going to happen unless we do it, maybe then. That's just my, you know, I as a trail user, I'm frustrated with this group because you show us a lot of things going on, but very little has happened relative to trail construction for non-motorized users. And even for motorized users, I mean, we all have, I mean, how many miles are there in roads in our forest? I mean, who can come up, tell me what the number is? Thousands of miles, hundreds of miles? Does anyone have that number?
Yeah, it's a high number. I mean, Astoria has somewhere close to between 900 and 1,000 miles. Tillamook probably around 1,500, and I don't know, 700 to 800 in Forest Grove district. So in those three Northwest districts, there might be 3,500 miles of roads.
Right. So what do we think? You know, what do we think we should have? You know, is this you know, less than 2%? Is that, anyway, just as a comment to what Barrett was talking about, just the multiplicity of all the trails and then to put a new road in, you know.
Thanks, Lisa. Mike Tody.
Yeah, this is a question for Lisa, actually. It's Mike Tody here. I'm kind of reading in here in terms of, are we asking the question about how to engage a district or the agency on the front end? So rather than like reviewing an AOP, we're actually trying to give suggestions on what should be in an AOP. Is that along the lines of what you're thinking?
Yeah, I don't understand what would be the cheapest way to integrate building a trail. I mean, I'm not a trail builder, I'm not a forester, but to me it seems like, why not do it after a clear cut, you know? And I mean, that's what some of the, you know, that's what's happening in some of the private lands. And I have no problem riding a horse or doing a hike through a clear cut and watching that forest grow, you know.
Lisa, for the benefit of brevity, I'll just say we can talk more later. I've got some interest from the department and the community in working with this new process development, this planning integration, where perhaps over the summer there would be a AOP public recreation development phase where we'd engage folks like you, the trails kind of a committee to work with staff to get AOP concepts generated, new trail construction where folks like you would like to see them. They would get vetted in the way that Derek talks about. So by the time they came to us here at AOP season, they would be ripe. Because it is kind of a tough spot to be here in AOP review time.
Sure, I understand. It's just, I'm not sure when the time is always right. And I just keep pushing this. You know, all I know is the numbers, 21 miles in Clatsop Forest. That is not enough. And how many years have I been here?
So that's something I'm working on with people in the department too. And I know the recreation unit wants to build that out too. So
Barrett,
go ahead.
I guess just the other aspect there, one of the other things that we're working on from the REI team's perspective is looking longer term with some strategic planning. And yeah, we try to be opportunistic where we can, but looking at our trail systems from a strategic perspective and identifying in out years, if we're going to add more, where is that? And how does that tie into existing trail systems? How do we do that in a way that's sustainable? How do we do that in a way that, back to Derek's point, so we're not doing something that gets impacted in 2 years after we invest in some sort of infrastructure, whether it be a trailhead or a trail system. And so that's something that we've been wanting to do for quite some time. It's a process that we're just beginning now to look at strategic planning multiple years out. So I think we will get there. We're just not there right now.
Sure. Sorry, we had one more hand up and then we'll go to you if that's okay. Absolutely. Sorry. Denise?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, sorry, my internet's unstable, which is why my camera's not on. I just, as vice chair, I'm gonna step in just a little bit to take some pressure off Barrett here because he's bringing up a topic as well as functioning as chair. So I'm just gonna make a suggestion, Andy and Ron, that maybe as we look at the agenda for our June and October meetings, it sounds like there's some frustration around recreation within SVAC and members who represent recreation, maybe around some things that are happening with, the new way that the department is moving forward. And so maybe it should be a topic that we can dive in a little more in depth at our June meeting and or our October meeting as well. And maybe we could talk about just kind of specifically focusing on this, in kind of the months to come, if that still makes sense then.
Oh, well put, Denise. Thank you. Yep.
Yeah, that's easy enough, Denise.
Amanda?
Yeah, Amanda with Associated Oregon Loggers. So I just want to put a marker down and kind of to follow up on what Denise just said, that, there's going to be even more conflict likely in the future because where the HCAs exist on the landscape and much of our high rec areas are outside of HCAs. So there's likely to be more conflict with user groups. And so I just want to put a marker down and just say, I would agree. It could be a good subject to focus on with this group of how do we create a better process moving forward that can address some of those conflicts. Because ultimately we still have to do work in the woods. So
Yeah, and we look forward to that. That's not something we can't work with. Okay, so we've, is there anything else for Derek? Derek, did you have anything else to wrap?
I have a couple more slides.
Okay.
Really just one more slide.
Okay, go ahead.
So next slide is just around gate installations. So for the last several years.
Eric, can you turn on your mic?
Yeah, let's try that again. So over the last several years, the districts have seen a substantial increase in fire hazards, illegal dumping, abandoned vehicles, and long-term camping. These behaviors create public safety problems, threaten environmental quality, and are costly to mitigate. As a last resort, ODF has the option to close roads to vehicular access if vandalism, neighbor concerns, or excessive road damage or fire hazard becomes a pervasive problem in particular areas. In 2021, following the Labor Day fires, North Cascade installed a number of gates on their lands, primarily for fire and safety hazards. In 2022, Forest Grove had a number of planned gates that were split between fire hazards and illegal dumping and long-term camping issues. And for this AOP, Astoria is proposing several gates that will at times limit vehicular access to targeted areas that have persistently presented problems, and public education efforts have not curtailed these behaviors. These gate locations will be located along Highway 26, Highway 30, and Highway 53. They're ones right off the highway. This is another spot I just wanted to stop and get some opinions from the committee on the best way to carry these messages on. These have been ongoing issues, and we're kind of out of options.
Mike, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. Mike Tody, Oregon Hunters here. And looking at that Clatsop AOP, I did see that, Derek, there. And I also saw a reference that those gates were planned to be open during rifle season there, which obviously for a hunting perspective is good depending on the location of gates. And I just wanted to reemphasize that. I understand the reason for the gates. I mean, that's from a fire perspective and certainly from a misbehavior perspective or abuse of the land is good. But just reiterating that not all gates are bad. And there's some other reasons and benefits to having certain gates in certain areas at certain times are beneficial. So, and just wanted to get that out there too. So if we're talking about resource conflicts here at times between timber harvesting and the trail system, and you know, I'm here to promote hunting. So from that perspective, you know, road closures during fawning season, calving season can be pretty beneficial at times, but then you got to deal with animal damage and some other things there too. So just wanted to kind of put that out there as another communication thing. That's something maybe the agency can look at as those types of perspectives as well, along with trying to avoid vandalism and damage, that sort of thing.
Okay. Not seeing any other comments. So the last was just a comment around that we are in the middle of the public comment period for the annual operation plans, and then just checking to see if there was any questions or comments that I have not answered yet. Seeing nobody want to throw anything at me, I will say that I've wrapped up.
Okay, great. And Justin has been, I'm greatly disappointed that, but we've asked if he would be willing to forego his presentation on the legislative kind of updates because of what I did to the agenda and the time schedule. So I appreciate that, Justin. What do you think about what we've got left to work with? 90 seconds.
90 seconds. Well, maybe Robbie, you could just characterize.
Sure. For the record, my name is Robbie Lefebvre. I'm the Assistant Area Director for Northwest Oregon area. So real quick, I guess last summer, we have 3 fire protection associations in Northwest. And for public use restrictions on how we limit access to certain activities on not only state forest, but also private forest during the summer, all 3 of the FPAs were different. And it caused confusion among users, as well as partner agencies like the BLM and OPRD across the area. And so we really looked in, and Jason, you can go to the next slide real quick if you've got it. And so those check mark means that's where we all lined up across the area. So that's pretty straightforward. And then the next slide, Jason. And the X's are where we didn't align. And so you can see that's around motor vehicles, OHV, cutting, grinding, you know, and some of the other stuff across the area. And so that really, and where Northwest lives is in that blue and the yellow, really that moderate and high. We very rarely get to extreme. It takes kind of a certain, except for North Cascade, they're a little bit different than the other 3, I would say, or other 2. And so we really looked at it as an area where we wanted our users, our users don't know when they cross that boundary to switch from one association to the other. And so it was just causing confusion. And so we spent time with all of the districts and recreation. Randy Peterson was the rec person there, really going through the differences. And Jason, if you go to the next slide. And then, so again, those first ones are all the same. And so we're going to be using this across Northwest Oregon area. All 3 of the FPAs will have the same public use restrictions. The only thing that'll be different is the contact information at the bottom. And so if you go to the next one, Jason. So those were all different on that previous slide with the X's. And now across the area, you're going to see it's all the same. And so one of the big differences is that motor vehicles. And one of the FPA is they weren't allowing motor vehicles at all during high on improved roads. And this summer, we're going to allow that across the area. So that way, when it is those hot days, the public can still get out, they can still get to the stream, they can still swim. And we weren't seeing a lot of starts by people just driving on a road. And then the other big one is on that, the OHV. It was all over the board across the area. And so, you know, we're going to allow it on low and moderate, and we're still going to allow it on high. The reason we're shutting it down at 1 on high is really when it gets to high in Northwest, we're probably at extreme elsewhere in the state, and there's probably a lot of fire on the landscape. And so at that point, Northwest IA capacity is at drawdown levels. And so, you know, we're saying, hey, get out and ride before 1 o'clock. But then if something does start in that heat of the day, give us an opportunity to go where it might have started somewhere else. And, you know, I think this is something we'll reevaluate at the end of this year. And if we need to update it and we're not seeing anything, there's a potential that we could change this again. But for this year, we're in a pretty good spot. You know, the BLM is happy as well. They were struggling with it, and OPRD will be as well. So we feel pretty good, and more to come after this fire season.
Thanks, Robbie. Any questions? Yep, I'll just reflect that this represents a pretty big change for motorized use on the system, and as near as I can tell, from around the world, in my position as in national leadership on that question, and across North America, I don't find any data that motorized recreation starts fires. There's zero. I mean, so from, you know, whether this is a data-driven concept or a more of a subjective decision, I think the organized world of motorcycle, you know, OHV recreation couldn't see it as a data-driven decision. Public access, camping, people parking the Subaru in the grass, campgrounds, people driving through the forest. But I think the perception that motorized users got a backpack full of fireworks and they're smoking going down the trail with their cooler on the back, you know, that's really not the world of trail-based recreation. And so it'd be hard to sell the public on why this will result in quite a significant change to what used to be in effect a waiver system for the designated trail system in the state, in Northwest Oregon.
Yeah, and so we've talked about the waiver system, you know, especially around Diamond Mill in that area, and that's still on the table, I think, for those areas, as long as the district forester is comfortable writing that waiver. And we did have those discussions. I think, you know, after this fire season, it will be up to the area and staff to really look at it again and to dive back into, do we want to allow OHV use across the area on that and on high? I don't think it's ever going to happen on extreme. No. But I think on high, that after this fire season, I think it's a discussion that we could have again.
Thanks. Any other questions for Robbie? Okay.
Lisa has a question.
Oh, thanks. Go ahead, Lisa.
Yeah, hi, just to kind of affirm the restrictions or it's just, we have a lot of rules and laws in life, and if there isn't compliance, meaning people in a car are not going to carry a gallon of water and a shovel, and there's no way for us to manage that or to regulate that or to give someone a ticket for it, then I'm not sure. From an educational viewpoint, there should be things. It should be said, this is what you should carry, and it's not the restriction, unless you really think we can regulate that. It just seems like there's, again, going to Barrett's, that there's not that much data on motorized use being responsible for fires. If you're saying you need a shovel and a couple gallons of water to be out on the landscape during these times, if you can't regulate it, you know, don't make it a rule. I guess that's just my feeling about all laws. or rules? I don't like them.
No, I thank you for that. And, I think we do a pretty good job of regulating public use during the fire season. We have patrols out all the time with our fire staff, our stewardship foresters out as well as state forest employees on state forest ground, really regulating campfire use and other access. And I know when I was a field employee, when I would see the public out during fire season, we would let them know that they needed a shovel in that water. And if they didn't have it, it wasn't us writing a ticket. It was more of an education and saying, hey, it's probably best that you leave the forest now, go get that stuff and come back when you have the proper tools that are out there. And our fire prevention, and I think as an agency, really starts from that education standpoint. And so we do try to educate the public. And I would say we do a really good job on it.
And I would further go on to say that the fact that we can write a ticket for it goes a long way, because there are certain members of the public that will say, yeah, you're not allowed to tell me that I have to. And so they won't do it. And, part of this is just what risk we have on the landscape, whether it's a, risk of a trail that's maybe a mile in from a road. If there is a fire, there may not be a fire, but once every 50 years. But if there's a spot where we have a fire that does not have access to it, the costs of value are extreme. And so the risk that we run by not having, somebody out there with water, it may not be an issue for 999 people, and that 1,000th person that starts a fire that didn't have the means to put it out immediately is the difference between multi-million-dollar fire. And so the risk at value, and that's the cost of putting out the fire, not the cost of the millions of dollars of timber lost. And so that's why it's so important that we have these ability to control what's going on out there.
Oh, okay, great. That's good to know. I mean, I know we're closing the roads because of trash, so I didn't know that you felt like you do have control over what someone carries in their car. So that's good. I'm glad you feel confident about that. Great.
Okay.
I guess just one last comment there, Barrett. I'd say that, this version of the public use restrictions, I'd say it's not perfect. It's a great step in the right direction, because just what you were talking about there, Lisa, with people understanding what they're supposed to do. And when you cross an imaginary line on the ground that is a district boundary, and all of a sudden you're expected to do something different, didn't make a whole lot of sense. And, a prevention program is only as good as your ability to enforce it or implement it. And it makes it a whole lot easier to implement if it's consistent. And so just nuances in language, kudos to Robbie for digging through, doing the trench work on this stuff. And working with 5 districts and 3 different protection associations to basically go back and mine through the why did we do this in the past? What do we think it looks like going forward, given that, the climate that we're operating in is different than what it used to be. And some of the language that we've been operating under is historic and may not represent some of the conditions that we're facing out there and the increased public use. So I see these as a step in the right direction. I think they will evolve over time. And our approach or our intent for this year was really to get that thread of consistency between those districts in the Northwest Oregon area to hopefully make it, have it make more sense to the users out there, which should lead to higher compliance with what we're actually asking people to do. If it's easier to understand, it should be easier to comply.
Well put.
It's a segue, so I don't know if you're closed on that.
Yeah, just to Derek's point, the point is not to eliminate all risk, or we could just close the entire forest. So this committee's job is to discuss these interactions between gray area decision making. And in this case, we're affecting tens of thousands of user visits per year. in Northwest Oregon for the motorized trail system. So it's not an insignificant impact to public use. That's we do have to engage somewhere on that, those trade-offs. So yeah, go ahead, Ron.
Yeah, I wanted to switch gears. I know we're running out of time, running a little late, but I wanted to invite Michael Curran up here, the district forester from West Oregon District, to share one of the proactive strategic investments that we're making in recreation. Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, thanks, Ron. So again, my name is Michael Curran. I'm the district forester for the West Oregon District. So last week, the agency was able to close on the purchase of 24 acres from the Weyerhaeuser Timber Company on a parcel of land there that abuts our Black Rock parcel. And the goal of this project was to try to fix some historical use conflicts we've had between the mountain bike community and some of the local neighboring landowners. So historically, the mountain bikers would have to park near Camp Tapawingo and then ride through the camp. And that's presented some problems historically for us. So with this project, this will enable us to put in a new parking lot and also a new trailhead and access points for the mountain bikers to where they won't have to go through the camp anymore. So REI is underway on the planning efforts for what that parking lot will look like and what the new trailhead will look like. So work's underway, and the first big domino to fall was to purchase the property, and it's been a couple years in the making, but we were able to finally close last Thursday.
That's a big deal, big milestone, and a huge investment by the department in solving just a huge problem. It's a great move. So congratulations. Thank you. We just have to nail down a date for our field tour. Where do you think we're at to date?
All right. So just as Kyle was talking earlier, we know our next meeting is June 24th, and typically in the past, right, we've had our summer tour either the day before or the day after that. And I'd say at this point, we're probably thinking that as opposed to having the tour follow the June meeting, we'll probably have it line up with the October meeting. And Kyle, unless you wave me off, that's kind of what we're thinking, to allow that work to get completed out there on at Fern Ridge sale. So the ability then to go in and, since this group has talked about that in multiple meetings, in preparation for it, the planning on it, and then be able to go in October when that work should be done and actually look at, there'll be opportunities to look across the road and do some before and after looks at the different treatments there and see how the planning efforts actually played out kind of in real time versus getting in there and having part of it done and part of it not done. We should be able to be there in October. And so we'll sort out whether it's the day before the October meeting or the day after the October meeting, but that's kind of where I think we're leaning right now. Does that still sound current, Kyle?
Yeah, like it.
Okay.
Before it's always worked out great because of the conversation time after the field visit. So just what is my input's worth there?
Okay. As far as, and your preference, right, just so I'm tracking, that would be to have the tour the day before the meeting, right? So we can come back in and do a kind of a debrief of what we saw.
Just one voice on that, but yes.
Okay. All right. Very good. And then I know we're up against the time here, and then just thinking about getting back together in June and, topics that would be of interest for the group. I mean, we already heard one as far as kind of the recreation planning effort, some of the frustration there. I think we can have an agenda item there and talk about, there's already efforts to help avoid some of that. I'll be straight up here, folks. We had some things fall through the cracks from a planning perspective, partially due to the growing pains of transitioning to the teams, planning and coordination team, in Salem and our REI team at the area level, and we had some misses in developing kind of the new planning cycle that involves the appropriate people at the appropriate time in that cycle. So we can talk through what that new cycle is going to look like and how we avoid some of the things that we were talking about here today. The other thing that's a possibility, I can't necessarily commit to it, but we talked about the implementation guidelines process when Bodie was given his presentation. The timing could be, it'll be really close, but there's the current trajectory could have the draft implementation guidelines done at the beginning of June. And if that is indeed the case, we could just insert that into our June meeting and have a discussion with SFAC around what those draft guidelines look like. If the timeline slips and it's not, then we'd figure out a way to get SFAC's input in another fashion. But if the current timeline holds out, that would actually be a nice opportunity to get feedback once they've got something on paper. So those are two topics just from what I gathered here today. And so part of my intent here is to see what else might folks want to talk about in June.
Don't see any hands up online. We'll just keep the email communication channels open as folks come up with ideas.
Okay.
Maybe we'll probably do maybe a reach out to email to committee members to solicit input as well. So, for agenda topics. Yeah, Amanda, go ahead.
Yeah, this is Amanda with AOL. I would maybe suggest that if it is reasonable to have Justin back to talk about the legislative, what's happening legislatively, POPs, and I know there's some transitions with REI and funding and things like that. It might be good to just have an update at the next meeting as well.
Good catch. Yeah, great. Sorry, Justin, you're gonna have to do this presentation after all next meeting. Anything else for the good of the order? Okay.
Not for the agenda, but just to thank everyone for their participation. The hybrid meeting process, not ideal, but we're progressing towards a new normal. And I appreciate everybody from the field coming in and making the trip and being here with us. And for all of you that came in, I really appreciate that, as well as everybody who was able to participate online today. And I hope that the medium was suitable for at least you to track what we were presenting and following the conversations. And then to let you know that what you all said today has been heard. I listening and hearing and processing what you've been saying, taking good notes, and you're bringing forward some really passionate values and ideas and suggestions for us to consider to help moving our work forward together. And just want to thank you for that, because it's important and we do want to hear what you're saying. So thank you.
Great. Thanks, everybody. I think we'll call it a meeting. Thanks for sticking around a little bit later.